The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah McKenna wiped the sweat from her brow, her calloused hands gripping the wooden fence post she'd been trying to repair for the better part of an hour. The ranch that had once thrived under her husband's care now stood as a testament to her stubborn refusal to surrender, though each passing day brought new evidence of her losing battle against the harsh frontier life. "Mrs. McKenna!" called out Tommy Peterson, the 17-year-old ranch hand who'd stayed on despite the dwindling wages. "There's riders approaching from the east." Sarah's heart quickened as she shielded her eyes against the glare, watching 3 horsemen emerge from the heat shimmer. She recognized the lead rider immediately, her brother-in-law Marcus McKenna, his broad shoulders rigid with the same disapproval he'd carried since her husband's funeral 6 months ago. "Sarah!" Marcus called out as he dismounted, his boots hitting the dusty ground with authority. "We need to talk." The other 2 men remained mounted, their hands resting casually near their sidearms. Sarah recognized them as members of the local militia, men who'd grown rich on government contracts to supply the army in their ongoing conflicts with the Apache. "If you're here to make another offer for the ranch, Marcus, my answer hasn't changed," Sarah said, straightening her shoulders despite the exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones more deeply each day. Marcus removed his hat, revealing graying hair dampened with sweat. "It's not about the ranch, Sarah, not directly." He paused, his gray eyes scanning the horizon nervously. "There's been Apache raids again. 3 families hit in the past week. The Peterson place, the Clearys, and yesterday the Hendersons." Sarah's blood ran cold. The Henderson ranch was only 8 miles south of her property. "Survivors?" "None," Marcus replied grimly. "Look, I know you think you can make it out here alone, but facts are facts. A woman running a ranch this close to Apache territory is asking for trouble." "I'm not alone," Sarah protested, gesturing toward Tommy, who had moved closer, his young face pale but determined. Marcus snorted. "A boy and a stubborn woman against Apache warriors?" "Sarah, be reasonable." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, something that made Sarah's pulse quicken in a way she couldn't explain. She found herself scanning the rocky outcroppings beyond the fence line, a strange sensation pulling her attention toward the canyon that cut through the eastern edge of her property. "I appreciate your concern, Marcus, but this is my home now. John left it to me, and I intend to honor that." "John's dead," Marcus snapped, then immediately looked ashamed of his outburst. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I know you loved my brother, but he's gone. You can't hold on to the past forever." As if summoned by their conversation about danger, a dust devil swirled across the yard, sending chickens scattering and filling the air with grit. When it passed, Sarah noticed movement among the rocks near the canyon entrance, just a flash of buckskin and dark hair that vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. But she knew she hadn't imagined the way her heart hammered against her ribs, or the inexplicable certainty that someone was watching her. "Give me 2 more months, Marcus," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "If I can't turn things around by then, I'll consider your offer." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 2 months, Sarah, but I want you to promise me something. If you see any sign of Apache activity, any sign at all, you'll come into town immediately. Don't try to be a hero." After the men left, Sarah found herself drawn toward the canyon despite every rational instinct screaming at her to stay close to the house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rocky landscape, and she told herself she was just checking the boundary markers, ensuring the fence line was secure. The canyon walls rose on either side of her, red sandstone carved by centuries of flash floods and wind. It was cooler here, almost peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. That's when she saw him. He emerged from behind a boulder, as silently as smoke, tall and lean, with long black hair that caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the canyon. His buckskin clothing was well crafted but worn, and across his chest ran 3 parallel scars that spoke of battles survived. But it was his eyes that caught her, dark as winter nights, but burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. They stared at each other across the span of 20 feet, 2 people from worlds that had been at war for longer than either could remember. Sarah knew she should run, should scream, should reach for the rifle she'd foolishly left back at the house. Instead, she found herself rooted to the spot, captivated by the warrior who watched her with the stillness of a predator, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "You are the widow McKenna," he said finally, his English accented but clear. "Yes," she whispered, surprised by her own courage. "Who are you?" The ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Someone who has been watching over you," he said, then melted back into the shadows as effortlessly as he had appeared, leaving Sarah alone with her racing heart and 1,000 questions that would haunt her dreams. Sleep eluded Sarah that night. Every creak of the old ranch house, every whisper of wind through the eaves, sent her heart racing as she replayed the encounter in the canyon. She rose before dawn, moving through her morning chores with mechanical precision, while her mind remained fixed on those dark eyes that had seemed to look straight into her soul. For 3 days she found excuses to venture near the canyon, checking water levels in the creek, mending fence posts that didn't need mending, gathering herbs that grew wild among the rocks. Each time she felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her, but the Apache warrior never showed himself. On the 4th evening, as purple shadows began to creep across the desert floor, Sarah made her decision. She saddled her mare, Bella, and rode directly toward the canyon, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and anticipation that she couldn't name. The canyon was deeper than she'd explored before, winding through layers of red rock that seemed to glow in the dying light. Ancient petroglyphs decorated some of the walls, spirals and handprints left by people who had called this land home long before any white settlers arrived. Sarah found herself wondering about their stories, their loves, their losses. "You came back," said a voice from the shadows. Sarah turned, unsurprised to find him there, though her pulse quickened at the sight of him. Tonight he wore his long hair loose, and it moved like black silk in the evening breeze. There was something different in his posture, less predatory and more curious. "I did," she said simply, dismounting and letting Bella's reins trail. The horse surprisingly seemed unafraid, lowering her head to crop at the sparse grass growing near the creek. "Why?" Sarah considered the question, searching for words to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said, about watching over me." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the intricate beadwork on his leather shirt, the silver medallion that hung from a cord around his neck. "My name is Aiyana," he said. "It means eternal blossom in my tongue." "Aiyana," she repeated, surprised by how naturally it rolled off her lips. "I'm Sarah. I know who you are, Sarah McKenna." His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I have watched you fight to keep your land when others would have given up. I have seen you work until your hands bleed, seen you stand against men who would take what is yours." "Why?" she asked, echoing his earlier question. "Why watch me?" Aiyana was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving over her face as if memorizing every feature. When he spoke, his words came slowly, carefully chosen. "Because you remind me that not all white settlers are the same. Because in you, I see someone who truly loves this land, not just what it can give them." The honesty in his voice made something flutter in Sarah's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. She found herself taking a step closer, drawn by an invisible thread she couldn't resist. "Your brother-in-law spoke truth about the raids," Aiyana continued, his expression growing grave. "My people are angry, desperate. The reservation land grows smaller each year, the promises broken like twigs underfoot. Some warriors believe the only answer is war." "And you?" Sarah asked. "What do you believe?" Aiyana's hand moved to the scars across his chest, fingers tracing the parallel lines with unconscious habit. "I believe that hatred breeds only more hatred, but I am, how do you say, caught between two worlds. My father was a war chief who died fighting your people. My mother's brother leads those who raid your settlements." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Sarah felt the weight of their circumstances, the impossibility of what she was beginning to feel for this man who should have been her enemy. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, though she made no move to leave. "Neither should you," he replied, stepping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Yet here we are. Their eyes met and held, the space between them crackling with unspoken desire. Sarah had never felt anything like this with her late husband, this electric awareness that made every nerve ending sing. When Aiyana slowly, carefully, reached out to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. The moment their skin made contact, Sarah gasped. It was as if lightning had struck, sending jolts of sensation racing up her arm. She looked down at their joined hands, her pale fingers intertwined with his darker ones, and felt the world shift on its axis. "Every time you touch me, I shiver," she whispered, amazed by her own boldness. Aiyana's lips curved into that ghost of a smile she was learning to treasure. "Then you feel it too," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. This fire that burns between us. They stood like that as the stars emerged overhead, two souls from warring worlds finding solace in each other's presence. Sarah knew this was madness, knew that discovery would mean death for both of them. But in that moment, with Aiyana's strong hand cradling hers, and his eyes reflecting the starlight, she couldn't bring herself to care about anything beyond the wonder of this connection. When they finally parted, it was with the unspoken understanding that they would meet again. As Sarah rode home through the desert night, she pressed her free hand to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his touch, and wondering if she was falling in love with salvation or damnation. Behind her, hidden among the canyon shadows, Aiyana watched until her figure disappeared into the darkness, his own heart heavy with the knowledge that what had begun tonight would change both their lives forever. 2 weeks passed like pages torn from a forbidden book. Sarah found herself living two lives, one in the harsh daylight reality of ranch work and suspicious glances from townspeople, and another in the magical twilight hours spent in the canyon with Aiyana. Their meetings had become as essential to her as breathing, each encounter deepening the bond that neither could deny nor fully understand. Tonight, Sarah arrived at their usual meeting place to find Aiyana already waiting, his silhouette unmistakable against the red canyon walls, but something was different in his posture, a tension that made her heart skip with worry. "What's wrong?" she asked, dismounting quickly and moving to his side. Aiyana's jaw was tight with barely controlled emotion. "There was another raid yesterday. The Jameson family, 15 miles north of here." He turned to face her, his dark eyes stormy with conflict. "My uncle Nalnish led the attack. He grows impatient with those of us who counsel peace." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She'd heard about the Jamesons in town that morning, a young couple with 2 small children, all found dead. The brutality of it had shaken even the hardened men who'd seen too much frontier violence. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching for his hand instinctively. He pulled back sharply, and the rejection stung more than any physical blow. "Sorry?" His voice carried an edge of bitterness she'd never heard before. "Your people celebrate when Apache die. They put bounties on our scalps like we are animals to be hunted." "I'm not celebrating anything," Sarah said firmly, stepping closer despite his withdrawal. "Those children, Aiyana, I would never—" "Would never what?" he demanded, whirling to face her. "Would never hate us? Would never fear us? Then why do your hands shake when you touch me?" Sarah's breath caught. "They don't shake from fear," she said quietly. The admission hung between them like a challenge. Aiyana stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths, then suddenly pulled her against him. His arms came around her waist, strong and desperate, and Sarah melted into his embrace with a soft gasp. "This is madness," he murmured against her hair. "We are enemies, Sarah. My blood and your blood have been spilled by each other for generations." "I don't care," she whispered, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "When I'm with you, none of that matters." "You're not Apache, I'm not white. We're just us." Aiyana's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "You don't understand the danger. If my people discovered these meetings, they would see it as betrayal. And your people—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what her people would do to a woman who consorted with the enemy. "Then we'll be careful," Sarah said, pressing her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. "We'll meet only here, only when it's safe." "There is no safe place for us," Aiyana said, but his resolve was weakening. Sarah could see it in the way his eyes softened, the way his body curved toward hers as if drawn by invisible threads. A distant sound made them both freeze, hoofbeats approaching from the direction of Sarah's ranch. They sprang apart, Aiyana melting into the shadows with his warrior's instincts while Sarah moved toward her horse, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus appeared at the canyon mouth, his face grim in the moonlight. Behind him rode 2 other men, their rifles ready across their saddles. "Sarah," Marcus called out, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God you're all right. When Tommy said you'd ridden out alone after dark—" "I needed some air," Sarah said, grateful that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The house felt too closed in tonight. Marcus dismounted, his eyes scanning the canyon walls with the wariness of a man who'd fought Apache before. "This isn't safe, Sarah, not anymore. After what happened to the Jamesons—" "I know about the Jamesons," Sarah said quietly. "It's terrible." "Terrible doesn't begin to cover it," one of Marcus's companions spat. "Animals, that's what they are. We should hunt them down like the savages they are." Sarah flinched at the venom in the man's voice, acutely aware of Aiyana listening from somewhere in the darkness. She wondered what it cost him to hear such words and remain hidden, to know that his very existence in this moment put her in mortal danger. "Come on," Marcus said, moving to help her mount. "I'll ride back with you." As they made their way out of the canyon, Sarah fought the urge to look back, to search the shadows for one last glimpse of the man who was becoming everything to her. She could feel the weight of his gaze following her, could almost hear his heart breaking in rhythm with her own. That night, Sarah lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her body still humming with the memory of Aiyana's arms around her. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the warmth of his breath against her skin, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer. Outside, a nighthawk cried out across the desert, its call echoing through the darkness like a lament for impossible love. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of her own, not to the god her people worshipped, but to whatever spirits watched over star-crossed lovers in this harsh and beautiful land. Miles away, in a hidden Apache camp nestled among the red rocks, Aiyana stared at the same stars and wondered if love was worth the price they would inevitably have to pay. His uncle's war drums had been beating since sunset, calling for more raids, more bloodshed. Soon Aiyana knew he would be forced to choose between his heart and his people, a choice that might destroy them all. The attack came at dawn, swift and merciless as a desert storm. Sarah woke to the sound of war cries and gunshots, her heart lurching as she scrambled from her bed toward the window. Through the pale morning light, she could see Apache warriors on horseback circling the ranch, their painted faces fierce in the growing daylight. But these weren't random raiders. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the leader. Nalnish, Aiyana's uncle, sat tall on his warhorse, his graying hair adorned with eagle feathers and his chest bearing the scars of countless battles. His eyes, when they found hers through the window, burned with a hatred that made her soul shrivel. "Mrs. McKenna," Tommy's voice cracked with terror as he called from the barn where he'd taken shelter. "What do we do?" Sarah grabbed her rifle, her hands surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Stay down, Tommy. Don't give them a clear shot." The warriors made no move to attack the house directly, instead driving off her cattle and horses with practiced efficiency. But Nalnish remained fixed in place, his gaze never leaving Sarah's window. When their eyes met, he raised his hand and pointed directly at her, then drew his finger across his throat in a gesture that needed no translation. He knew. Somehow, Nalnish knew about her meetings with Aiyana. The raiders vanished as quickly as they'd come, leaving behind nothing but dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, understanding with crystal clarity that this had been a warning, one that promised death if she didn't heed it. That evening, despite every rational instinct screaming at her to stay away, Sarah rode to the canyon. She had to see Aiyana, had to warn him that their secret was no longer safe. But when she arrived at their meeting place, she found him already waiting, his face a mask of anguish. "You shouldn't have come," he said, not moving from where he stood against the canyon wall. "Not after today." "Your uncle knows," Sarah said, dismounting with shaking hands. "He looked right at me, Aiyana. He knows about us." Aiyana closed his eyes, pain etching deep lines around them. "I feared as much. I have been watched, questioned. Some of the younger warriors whisper that I have grown soft, that my heart has been stolen by the enemy." "Then we have to leave," Sarah said desperately, moving toward him. "We can go somewhere far from here, somewhere neither of our people will find us." "And live as what?" Aiyana's voice was bitter. "Outcasts? Hunted fugitives? Sarah, there is no place in this world for what we are." "There has to be," she insisted, reaching for his hands. "Love this strong doesn't happen by accident. There has to be a reason, a purpose." Aiyana pulled away sharply, and the rejection cut through her like a blade. "Love?" he said, his voice rising. "What do you know of love? You speak of it like one of your fairy tales, as if feeling something makes it right." The cruelty in his words staggered her. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say things you don't mean just because you're afraid." "Afraid?" Aiyana laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I fear death? I have walked with death since I was old enough to hold a weapon. What I fear is what my weakness has already cost." "What are you talking about?" "My cousin, Dakota, was one of the warriors who died in the raid on the Henderson Ranch. He was 17, Sarah. 17 and eager to prove himself a man." Aiyana's voice cracked with grief. "He volunteered for that raid because he heard the others question my loyalty. He died trying to restore honor to our family name. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Aiyana, you can't blame yourself. Can't I? His eyes blazed with self-loathing. While I was stealing moments with you, dreaming of impossible futures, my people were dying. While I was touching your skin and whispering sweet words, families were being torn apart. The raids would have happened whether we met or not, Sarah said desperately. You know that. But perhaps Dakota would still be alive if I had been there to counsel patience, instead of lost in dreams of love. Aiyana turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with pain. This ends tonight, Sarah. It has to. No, she said, her voice breaking. I won't let you do this. I won't let you throw away what we have because you're hurting. She moved to touch him, but he spun around, grabbing her wrists with a grip that was just shy of painful. Look at me, he demanded. Really look at me. I am Apache. My hands have killed your people. My uncle's warriors ride against your settlements. How can you touch me knowing that? Because I know your heart, Sarah said fiercely. I know the man who watches over a widow from the shadows, who speaks of peace when others call for war. That's who you are, Aiyana. Not your uncle's crimes, not your people's anger. You. For a moment his resolve wavered. She could see it in the way his grip on her wrists gentled, in the way his eyes searched her face as if memorizing every detail. Then, like a door slamming shut, the coldness returned. Your heart will be the death of us both, he said, releasing her and stepping back. Go home, Sarah. Marry your brother-in-law or some other white man. Have children who will never know the touch of Apache blood. Forget this madness between us. I can't, she whispered. I love you. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the gods themselves. Aiyana closed his eyes, as if her declaration caused him physical pain. Then learn to stop, he said quietly, because I will not be the reason more innocent blood is spilled. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the canyon like smoke dissipating in the wind. Sarah sank to her knees in the dust, her heart shattering into pieces that she wasn't sure could ever be put back together. As she rode home through the desert night, the stars above seemed cold and distant, no longer the benevolent witnesses to their love, but harsh judges of its impossibility. Behind her, the canyon stood silent and empty, holding only the ghost of what might have been. 3 weeks passed like a slow death. Sarah moved through her days mechanically, tending to what remained of her ranch, while her heart withered like a flower in drought. Marcus visited daily now, bringing supplies and increasingly urgent pleas for her to abandon the property and move to town. You can't keep this up, he said one afternoon, watching her struggle to repair fence posts that raiders had destroyed. The Apache hit the Morrison place last night. That's less than 5 miles from here, Sarah. Sarah barely looked up from her work. The constant threat of death had become almost a comfort. Anything was better than the emptiness that consumed her since Aiyana's rejection. I'm not leaving, she said flatly. Marcus grabbed her arm, forcing her to face him. Look at yourself. You're wasting away. This isn't what John would have wanted for you. John's dead, Sarah replied with brutal honesty. And maybe it's time I accepted that some dreams are meant to die too. That evening, as purple shadows crept across the desert, Sarah found herself walking toward the canyon, despite her better judgment. She told herself she wasn't hoping to see Aiyana. She'd learned better than that. But the canyon had become her sanctuary, the only place where she could still feel connected to something beyond mere survival. She was surprised to find another figure already there. Not Aiyana, but an elderly Apache woman with silver-streaked hair and deeply lined hands. The woman sat beside the creek, grinding corn in a stone bowl, as comfortable as if she were in her own home. You are the White Widow, the woman said without looking up, her English heavily accented but clear. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at her belt, but something in the woman's peaceful demeanor stopped her. Yes. Who are you? I am Desba, grandmother to the one you call Aiyana. The old woman finally raised her eyes, and Sarah was startled by their warmth. I have come to speak of my grandson's foolishness. Sarah's heart lurched. Is he all right? Desba smiled, her expression both sad and knowing. His body lives, but his spirit grows sick with grief. He believes that by cutting out his heart, he serves his people. But a man who denies love serves no one. He's right to stay away, Sarah said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. Our love brings nothing but death and pain. Does it? Desba set aside her grinding stone and studied Sarah with ancient eyes. Tell me, child, what have you learned from loving my grandson? The question caught Sarah off guard. What do you mean? Before you knew Aiyana, what did you think of Apache people? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was afraid," she admitted. I believed what everyone told me, that you were savages, dangerous, less than human. And now I know that's a lie," Sarah said fiercely. "Aiyana is the most honorable man I've ever known. He's gentle and wise and—" She stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. Desba nodded approvingly. "And if you can change, if you can see truth, where once there were only lies, what does that tell you about others?" Before Sarah could answer, the sound of approaching horses shattered the evening quiet. But these weren't Apache ponies. These were the heavy mounts of white settlers, and they were coming fast. "Sarah!" Marcus's voice echoed off the canyon walls as he and 6 other men thundered into the narrow space. "Get away from that savage!" Sarah stepped protectively in front of Desba, her heart hammering. "She's not armed, Marcus. She's just an old woman." "An old Apache woman in raiding territory," snarled Pete Morrison, his face twisted with fresh grief and rage. "My wife and daughter are dead because of her kind." "This woman had nothing to do with that," Sarah said firmly, but the men were already dismounting, their intentions clear in their hard faces. "Maybe not," Marcus said, his voice heavy with reluctant authority. "But she'll know where their camp is. She'll tell us, or she'll hang like the rest of them should." "No!" Sarah spread her arms wide, shielding Desba with her body. "I won't let you hurt her." "Sarah, move aside," Marcus commanded. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. "I understand that hatred only breeds more hatred. I understand that if we keep killing each other's grandmothers and children, this war will never end. Get out of the way or we'll move you ourselves," Pete Morrison growled, reaching for his gun. That's when Aiyana appeared. He materialized from the rocks above like an avenging spirit, dropping silently behind the mounted men. In one fluid motion, he disarmed 2 of them and held a knife to Marcus's throat before any of them could react. "Let the women go," he said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a true warrior. "Aiyana, no!" Sarah cried out, understanding that his appearance here meant certain death for both of them. But Desba rose slowly to her feet, her ancient voice carrying an authority that seemed to freeze everyone in place. "Enough," she said. "All of you, enough." She moved between the 2 groups, her weathered hands extended toward both sides. "I am Desba, daughter of Chief Manuelito, grandmother to warriors, mother to peacemakers. And I say this bloodshed ends today." "You have no authority here, old woman," Pete Morrison spat, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I?" Desba's eyes blazed with the power of years and wisdom. "I who have buried sons and grandsons in this war, I who have watched children starve on the reservation while politicians grow fat on promises, I who have seen love bloom between enemies and watched fools try to kill it." She turned to face Marcus directly. "Your brother John McKenna, he spoke Apache, did he not?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Some. He traded with peaceful bands sometimes." "He traded with my band," Desba said quietly. "He was a good man, a fair man. He spoke often of his younger brother who would inherit his ranch someday. He would be ashamed to see you here, threatening an old woman and his widow." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Sarah watched the fight drain out of him as he lowered his weapon. "And you," Desba continued, turning to her grandson, "you think hiding your heart serves anyone? Love is not weakness, Aiyana. Love is the only thing strong enough to build bridges across the chasms hatred has carved." Aiyana's knife hand trembled, but he didn't lower the blade. "Grandmother, you don't understand." "I understand that your white woman stepped between guns and death to protect me," Desba said firmly. "I understand that she would die before betraying your people, and I understand that such love is a gift from the spirits, not a curse to be thrown away." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 7 men with guns, 1 Apache warrior with a knife, and 2 women standing in the space between war and peace. Then Sarah spoke, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the desert air. "Every time you touch me, I shiver," she said, her eyes locked on Aiyana's, but not from fear, from hope, from the dream that love might be stronger than hate. Aiyana's composure finally cracked. The knife slipped from his fingers as he stared at her across the impossible distance of their circumstances. "Sarah, choose," she said simply. "Choose love or choose war. But don't pretend you can serve both." For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, no one moved. Then Aiyana stepped forward away from his hostages, his hands empty and extended. "I choose love," he said, his voice carrying across the canyon like a vow. "Even if it costs me everything." Marcus could have shot him then. Pete Morrison reached for his gun, murder in his eyes. But Sarah moved first, crossing the space between them in 3 quick steps and throwing herself into Aiyana's arms. Their kiss was desperate, defiant, and witnessed by enemies who had become, in that moment, something else entirely. When they broke apart, Desba was smiling through tears. "Sometimes," she said to no one in particular, "the spirits answer prayers we didn't know we'd made." 1 year later, Sarah and Aiyana stood before a gathering unlike any the territory had ever seen. Apache families beside white settlers, their children playing together while the adults shared food and tentative conversation. The wedding ceremony honored both traditions, with Desba offering Apache blessings while the town preacher spoke Christian vows. Marcus, now serving as territorial representative to the Apache bands, watched his sister-in-law beam with happiness as she promised her life to a man who had once been his enemy. The peace treaty he'd helped negotiate wasn't perfect, no peace ever was, but it was a beginning, built on the foundation that 2 hearts from different worlds had dared to lay. The canyon where they'd first met now bloomed with wildflowers, planted by Apache and white children working side by side. And sometimes, when the desert wind was just right, visitors claimed they could hear echoes of laughter from lovers who had proven that some bridges, once built by courage and watered with hope, could withstand any storm. In the end, Sarah thought as she looked into her husband's dark eyes, love hadn't conquered all, but it had conquered enough.